I mean, after a number of years of, really kind of bad things going on, at least in the United States, and kind of losing hope for humanity, this was a huge boost to my belief in that, the beauty of humanity, that, all these people are working to help people they don't really know on the side, and as much as they can. And some people put themselves in some serious danger. I mean, there was a number of people who volunteered and actually went into Kabul and pulled people out.
Welcome back to another episode of SaltCubeAnalytics, a channel dedicated to analyze human behavior. My guest today is Keith Cole, and if his story is not an inspirational one, then I really don't know what is. The backdrop of his account plays out in Afghanistan, a dirt poor country in Central Asia that, thanks to its location and the geopolitical interests of successive empires, seems condemned to eternal suffering. Already 200 years ago, the British played the so-called Great Game on Afghan soil, which is a euphemism for their brutal attempts to protect India, the crown jewel of the British Empire's colonies, from Russian interests. 150 years later, the Russians really invaded Afghanistan, resulting in 20 years of war, about 2 million dead Afghans, and the end of the Soviet Empire. Ironically, to defeat the Russians in Afghanistan, America armed the same men who, only a couple of years later, would drive the Americans out of Afghanistan too. These images should give you an impression in which circumstances Keith and later his teams worked, and how chaotic the American withdrawal at the end of 2021 really was. The similarities with Vietnam are undeniable. In addition to the human toll, it is estimated that the war has cost American taxpayers $2.3 trillion. Trillion with a T for tango. That's a staggering number which nobody can really comprehend. How much is a trillion? Well, if you would earn $1 every second, and if you would work 24/7 all year around, you would have to work more than 31,000 years to earn 1 trillion. Now you can do the math for 2.3 trillions. And let's not forget all the military equipment that the US had to leave behind. Anything from helicopters, airplanes, 75,000 military vehicles, and more than 600,000 military-grade weapons, enough to turn the whole region into chaos for decades to come. Still, and this is where this story becomes exceptional, in all this mayhem, some people stood up and against all odds prevailed in helping those left behind by the power who was supposed to protect them. One such person is Keith. And if you wonder how all this relates to behavior analysis, which is the topic of this channel, Keith had to draw on his experience as a senior executive to remote manage a situation that required building trust, constant motivation, deception detection, and reading people to succeed, and he will explain the techniques he used in this interview. Failure for Keith would have meant to lose lives, so the stakes could not have been higher. Here is his story. Here we go. Keith Cole, welcome, and thank you very much for taking the time of doing this. I was really looking forward to this conversation because your story is a truly unique one. How are you on this? For you, it's noon-ish. For me, it's evening. How are you today, Keith?
I'm doing great, Thomas. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here.
Thank you. Keith is here to tell, as I said already, a really amazing and unique story. And I'm not even sure the word story, is the right one here. Experience, or, it's probably better. During the 2021 withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan, Keith saved countless lives, and he did so as private citizen and on his own initiative, without any title, position, or connections to government, organization, or institutions. Really remarkable. I believe, Keith, the latest number I heard, you exfiltrated more than 40 people from Afghanistan in the absolutely most difficult circumstances imaginable. And you did so by building a network of like-minded people virtually from your living room. And all of that next to your normal day-to-day occupation. Did I capture the quintessence of what you did correctly so far?
Pretty much. I should say this was done with a team of people. On the original woman that we helped evacuate and escape Afghanistan was done with a team of 3. and we linked up with another team, and then with the remaining 46 people, it was done with various teams. And so this was really a community effort of a number of as you said, like-minded people who were interested in helping, friends, colleagues, associates, people that had done a tremendous amount of work for the U.S. and Western governments that were no longer safe. And so they were out to help them be safe and, evacuate from the country. So again, this was a big effort of a huge network of people. And I just want to say my story is just one story of many. There are a tremendous number of people who did things far greater than I, and I really, in many ways, benefited by the kindness and generosity of others.
You are very modest, but I have seen this already from previous discussions, right? But I would like to put this into context, right? I have recently analyzed a video. You can find it on YouTube. It's called something like Societal Decay in America or in New York, right? It's about a woman who is attacked in the New York subway on broad daylight by somebody, and nobody stepped in. There were like 20, 30 able and capable men. The best thing they did, they were videoing the whole thing. Nobody stepped in. Yeah. So stories or experiences like yours give hope. Yeah. On so many different levels. In addition to that, I did not really find much information on the internet about you. So probably that's another sign of your modesty, because you don't, how shall I say this, broadcast your experience on to a wider audience. I had to actually do some research. I came across you via your common acquaintance, Robin Dreek, which we will maybe discuss a little bit later, because I detected that he was, to some degree, he was involved in your experience, but we come to this later. Okay. So first, again, the limited information that I found about you. So you are actually, I think, a speaker. You talk about negotiations, partnerships, and collaborations. Yeah? So negotiations, I'm very interested in negotiations. What is it exactly that you talk about when you talk about negotiations?
So I'm not necessarily, I do presentations. I try to do presentations at least one a year. It's been difficult, obviously, for the past couple of years because of COVID. I think they're a good professional discipline in that it helps you look at your, field of expertise or your field of interest from an outsider's point of view. And I think it helps you deepen your understanding of the work that you do when you have to explain it to other people. And so, my core work is I build strategic partnerships. Historically, I've done it for the private sector, and then most recently now I do it for the humanitarian sector.
Okay, building strategic partnerships. Can you elaborate a little bit? What exactly does that mean in practice?
It really is, so whatever your goal is, it's two or more organizations coming together to do something bigger than either one can do by themselves. I really borrowed from the model of Hollywood studios back in the early beginnings of Hollywood studios. In-house, they had everything. And so they had all their actors on contracts. They did all their production, all their editing. Everything was in-house under one brand. Obviously, that wasn't very efficient. And so, that's why when you see movies now, like the first 10 minutes is like all these different movie company names and, all the different players in the production of the movie. Because what they found was that it was a lot more efficient and cost effective to build partnerships and collaborations, around a project. And so that's essentially what I have done for a number of different organizations, as I said, both public and humanitarian, is that, whatever our intervention or whatever our goal or our mission is, I look at key players that could be helpful to helping us achieve our goal at the highest standard possible, while also providing a service and a resource back to our partners as well. And so it's something that we're both aligned in terms of mission and both culture and in terms of achieving a goal, and we're both helping each other achieve what our ultimate goals are. And
those companies come to you, or they start with the project, or how do I have to envision that? How does it work?
I usually reach out. And so we'll reach out. We say, this is what we do. And Oftentimes it's kind of a marriage of interest in terms of they were also looking for partners to do their outreach as well. So it's really kind of matchmaking in many ways. You had mentioned negotiation. Negotiation is always a part of it. I look at negotiation in a very broad standpoint, that anytime you want something or you need something from somebody else, you're negotiating. I'm constantly negotiating with my children. I'm negotiating with my wife. So it's everything from personal to private to, the person you meet on the street to, the police officer who pulls you over to whatever the case may be. Anytime you need something from somebody else or want something from somebody else, whether you realize it or not, you're involved in a negotiation.
True. So do you apply your professional negotiation skills when you negotiate with your wife?
I do. Because I try to be very consistent in terms of how I do things. And so, I take the exact same standards, that are exact same kind of protocols that I do with my wife or with my children or anybody else that I care about that I'm negotiating with as I would with a counterpart. I try to treat people how I want to be treated. And so, I try to find out what their goals are and what their objectives are, and really, kind of co-create an outcome together. I find that's the best way to negotiate, because what I'm also negotiating is relationship, not just outcome. And so, if you beat someone up in negotiation, they're going to look for a way to cut you down the line. So, I try to really build a strong relationship with somebody, and because this is someone ideally I want to do not only this opportunity or this deal with, I want to do multiple deals with.
And very concrete. So you have your own company, or you have a project, generally speaking, and based on the project, you then reach out to certain potential partners, or how do you have to see this?
So I work for a humanitarian organization currently, and we do a number of different interventions. And so then in that kind of that value chain, I look at what key partners, or I look at what the key needs are within that value chain. And so then I reach out to primarily corporations, sometimes it's other organizations as well, to see who can play a role within that value chain to both reduce our costs, but also increase our ability for performance for impoverished communities. And so we engage them in with kind of a value proposition. This is what we'd like to do. This is where our challenges are and where our gaps are, and we think you can help in those areas, and also please let us know how we can help you. It's never for me to decide on how we can help another organization. I really elicit kind of what their needs and wants are, and we look for ways to meet those needs. Okay.
Myself working in a very large global organization, I'm just wondering, how do you know whom to approach? How do you get in? How do you pass the gatekeepers?
That is a great question. It's usually through opportunity. So oftentimes it's either through relationships and connections. You work hard enough, you can always find someone's email. And so sometimes I don't often do it. I'll do cold outreaches. You do a number of different tests. It could be, first letter, last name, then, at whatever the company's name is. First name, dot, last name, whatever. I do different variations until I don't get an email kick, until I don't get a negative response that the email didn't go through, and then I realize, okay, that's it. Or I look at press releases and see how the press officer signed their name at the bottom of the press release, and that gives me a good indication on kind of the format by which organizations, structure their email. Then I'll reach out, with, this is who I am, this is who we are, this is what we're attempting to do, and we'd love to have a conversation. And, I generally get a pretty high, of course, there's areas, I've done quite a bit of research behind the scenes to make sure that it's a good fit, that this is something that they're interested in as well. So I always, start with, would this be potentially a good alignment for both organizations?
So if you work for a non-profit organization, for example, how do you determine which company could be interested to be a partner? What are the parameters?
Typically, you kind of their history, and you look at what they've done previously and what they're saying publicly, and you see if that meets the needs and kind of what they're doing professionally. We have, we're really fortunate that we have some partnerships with, they're industry leaders in each one of their individual areas. And we work in a really kind of beautiful environment now that so many corporations are really interested and invested into doing important work, impactful work, in developing countries around the world to help them, improve the quality of their lives. And so I think there is very much a kind of parallel in terms of worldview between the humanitarian sector in many cases, as well as the as well as the private sector. So oftentimes I see that we're, in many cases, aligned. Sometimes I have conversations and I find out we're not so aligned, and so that's okay. We can leave being friends. We don't necessarily have to agree, or maybe it's not a good fit. But I really look at a number of different attributes and kind of what they've done and what they've said publicly to see if it's a good fit. And pretty quickly. That's the beauty I love about working with the private sector in general, is that it usually takes one meeting to know really quickly, and you probably know in about the first 20 minutes of that meeting whether it's a good fit. And then it just clicks immediately. I've been really fortunate in so many of the partnerships that I work on, it's been an immediate click. And they're partnerships that have lasted. Most of the partnerships that I'm currently managing right now, leading right now, are anywhere between 15 to 10 years old. So these are long-term sustaining partnerships.
Keith, I also see that you have worked in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, all over the place. Could you tell us about, let's say, the key achievements in those countries?
Key achievements. That's a difficult one.
But most interesting, let's just say the most interesting projects that you did and where they were.
I would say, like in India, I would say everyone just played a lot of those were done earlier in my life, when I was in my 20s and my 30s, and those became really important moments and lessons and experiences that I think helped me be successful in my 40s and now my 50s, and be really successful in that area. So that I think I was picking up what I would kind of say arrows from my quiver, whereby I would learn different experiences and have, when you're traveling around the world, that really takes you out of your comfort zone and out of your, preferred environment, and you have to adapt and, at times be very, very scrappy in terms of utilizing different resources, about how to engage people and kind of meet your needs and wants. And you oftentimes find yourself in a variety of really fascinating circumstances. When I was in Hungary, I was doing some work with the ambassador of Colombia, which was an interesting experience. And I was also doing some work with the charge d'affaires of the embassy of Chile. And so it's just by being a visiting scholar for the School of Foreign Trade within Hungary. And so you just get these amazing experiences and doing cross-border experiences. This was soon after the fall of the Soviet Union. So Eastern and Central Europe was still kind of a wild place. And that was definitely a big cultural difference for me. And so, I had to negotiate. I think in many ways, I probably learned more negotiation skills in Hungary when I was living in Hungary, traveling around Eastern Europe, than I did anywhere else. Because the cultures were so different that you had to find really creative means and methods by which to get around.
Since you say visiting scholar, yes, you have actually a master's degree, right? And a bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
What did you do for your master's degree? What was it that you did?
So I did educational linguistics. It was kind of a roundabout way to do things. So my godfather was an FBI agent, and he always told me, if you really want to know who people are and how they think, really listen to how they talk. And so I did a focus on discourse analysis, which obviously plays quite well into a lot of my interest in negotiation as well. So I really listened keenly to how, word structure, sentence structure and word choice and things such as that, by which to really kind of size up somebody. Not only those things, but those things play a key role within that. And so the discourse analysis part was a critical interest of mine, was really the motivation that I went in with this degree.
This is an unexpected coincidence because I'm a linguist.
Okay.
I'm fully with you. Yeah. So there are so many misconceptions. There people think they have full control over what they're saying. It's not true. You might know him actually if you're Avinoam Sapir, the creator of the scientific content analysis, Israeli police force. I interviewed him. I interviewed Mark McLeish, who is the creator of the statement analysis, right? So linguists is absolute a field of extreme interest to myself. Even my master's thesis was on omissions, linguistic pragmatic cues of deception during high-stakes negotiations. And I was focusing on signs that could indicate omissions.
That's fascinating.
Amazing. This coincidence, cool. that coincidence is really amazing. Good. Coming to the next step. So I don't know if you can or are free enough to comment on it. Yeah. Very briefly, now that we have the Ukraine situation, when you compare your experience in Afghanistan with what's going on at the moment in Ukraine, yeah, the common denominator, of course, are the refugees. Mm-hmm. Is there any insights that you could share?
I mean, both are just horrible humanitarian tragedies. And, and I think the saddest thing about both of them, they were both completely avoidable. The situation in Afghanistan was substantially different in terms of, I would say, from the refugee population. It was much more difficult for people to leave Afghanistan, while in the Ukraine, they were really blessed. I think some people had learned from the problem in Afghanistan. I mean, I think the two are definitely interrelated. There was definitely a cause and effect between the two situations. But, so many of the neighboring countries, Romania, Poland, Moldova, I believe Bulgaria as well, were very welcoming in terms of allowing refugees to cross pretty freely. And so, unlike where the borders were locked up in Afghanistan, there was quite a bit of freedom of movement of people with outside of the country.
I think that's also one of the greatest points of critique of medias or countries outside of the Western media bubble. That the difference in treatment of, let's say, refugees from Ukraine now and refugees from past crisis places.
Yep, absolutely.
If we come to Afghanistan, and again, just to set the stage and to frame it in a certain way. So we know that the US has retreated after 20 years, and I think it was the 30th of August 2021. Actually, it was the 29th. The official date was actually 2029th. Yeah. Yep. I'm luckily still young enough not to be old enough to remember myself Vietnam. Yeah. But I absolutely have the images from the helicopters on the rooftop, single helicopter where at least 100 people tried still to come in, on the rooftop. Right. And comparable images are now available through the tragedy in Afghanistan, where people clung outside on the military airplanes and fell to their death when those airplanes actually left. So it's for the people there an absolute tragedy, right? Then we have, of course, the massive amount of military equipment left behind. According to auditors with the Open Books, which is a government spending watchdog, there are more than 75,000 military vehicles and, 750,000 weapons that have been left behind, which will contaminate the region for decades to come, right? And that's only in addition to the human tragedy, right? I have to say, according to the information that I obtained here, the withdrawal, of course, started already under Trump. And when Biden started, I think there were only 2,500 American troops left, which at the end stages last year, August, they had to increase the numbers, actually 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 again, just to secure the parameters. Mm-hmm. And that is the stage, the time when you and your team came in action to rescue those people. Yeah. So I think it's hard to overstate the absolute chaos and mayhem under which you and your team have operated. And that brings me now, I have spoken enough, and Avinoam Sapir, which I have already mentioned, he's an interrogator from Israel. He told me the less you ask, the more information you get. So I will heed his advice, and I will hand over the microphone to you. My entry point will be, how did you get involved?
Well, it wasn't my intention. I'll say that. Sometimes you choose the job and sometimes the job chooses you. And this was a situation definitely where the job chose me. So I was driving down the freeway on August 23rd. I was talking to I was hearing, I was listening really closely, I think like so many people, about the tragedy in Afghanistan in terms of the withdrawal and just, the human crisis that it was creating. And so I was, listening to the news all the time, as well as so many other people. And then I remember exactly where I was when the thought came to me. I remembered that actually I knew a woman who was working in Afghanistan. So I reached out to a friend of mine and I asked him, hey, how is she doing? She's safe. What's the plan? Is she going to get out? What's the plan? He said, fortunately she was, out on family leave, for the summer. And so she's, at home, she's safe, she's, in good shape. Then he said, however, there's this other woman who's in grave danger. She was a women's rights activist. She was also an engineer that led an all-male engineering team. And she worked in Western Afghanistan, which in many ways were pro-Taliban areas. And so she was well known by the Taliban. And in these communities. And so she was in very, very serious threat with the impending full withdrawal of the United States.
Sorry, did you say that was August 23rd?
Yep, August 23rd was when I
which is 6 days before the withdrawal. Yep. So you started this whole thing. This thought came to you 6 days before the withdrawal. Amazing.
Yeah. So this was just with the first woman, and then she led to a whole number of other people. So, again, it was not my intention, but working with, again, she still has family in Afghanistan, so there's still people working to get people out of Afghanistan. So I will just call her, for the purposes of this conversation, as with other conversations that I've had around this, we'll call her M. And so my friend told me about M, and he said, someone was in conversation with her, and so he put me in I knew the person, so I reached out to him, and he said, I don't think there's anything we can really do. And to me, that seemed like kind of an unsatisfactory answer, and so I reached back to my original friend, and I found two other colleagues that knew her personally. And so I said, why don't we build a team and let's see if we can help her. I had no idea. I knew a few people. I had some friends that were private military contractors in Afghanistan. I knew a really good friend of mine was also a former member, or he had formerly worked for the NSA. So I thought, maybe they would, I was hearing about these evacuation flights, going out of Kabul. And so I figured, maybe they would know someone who can help. It's just one person, so how hard could it be? That was my naivete at the very beginning. So through a variety of circumstances, on August 24th, we were put in touch with M. And we started having conversations. I asked her a number of questions about her situation. She was having to move houses every single night. The Taliban was going door to door with her photo and her name and her family's name and knocking on doors looking for her. That's what she was scared. She was reporting that this was happening and that she needed to get out. I said, look, I can provide you potentially with some options. We're here to help you, and this is what we can do. And then that's the only thing I could do the entire time, was provide options. So on the one side, I was working with a network of kind of a network of trust among different parties and different individuals to create options. And then with her, I was offering her options. I always wanted her to have agency. So she was fully kind of the master of her own destiny. And she was making the
in control.
In control that she needed. It wasn't the control issue, I think, in a chaotic situation when she's in it and I'm far away from it, I saw as critical from the very beginning. And quite honestly, I'll say, maybe it's somewhat even cowardly. To a certain degree, I didn't want full responsibility for her life, so I needed her to make the decisions. She was closest to the problem as well, so I think probably it was the most prudent approach to it. And so it was always a discussion between me, M, and the two other people that I was working with.
I was just wondering, before we continue, there is something in the back of my mind I would like to ask you. You mentioned that you had contacts to NSA, other law enforcement agencies. Nothing in your CV, as far as I can say, would indicate you having these kind of contacts. So I'm just wondering, how did they come to?
No, these are just friends. These are friends through a variety of circumstances that we were friends that had worked in different areas. I do a number of different sports and different outside of activities that martial arts and stuff like that. So you just run into a lot of different people. So these were friends that had worked in those areas. So I want to make it really clear. I have no military background, no other government background. So there's nothing shadowy I'm a pretty average person. There's nothing super special about me.
I beg to differ, but okay.
So, she was interested in our help. She was very scared, and I thought, so I reached out to my two friends, and what they did is they gave me, a couple names of other people, and slowly, over a relatively short period of time, I really had what, was called a network of trust. I had, people who were, Air Force, people who, Marines, Special Forces. One was actually active NSA. All these people who were working privately, not working in any official capacity. That was the most beautiful thing about this whole kind of underground network helping people out of Afghanistan. No one I knew was doing it as a result of their job. Everybody was doing it volunteer. They were all working as private citizens. I mean, after a number of years of, really kind of bad things going on, at least in the United States, and kind of losing hope for humanity, this was a huge boost to my belief in that, the beauty of humanity, that, all these people are working to help people they don't really know on the side, and as much as they can. And some people put themselves in some serious danger. I mean, there was a number of people who volunteered and actually went into Kabul and pulled people out. And again, these were all volunteers. And so it was really an encouraging and uplifting time. And it was a huge honor for me to work with so many of these people, or at least be in touch with them.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt, but you said again, you said a flag in my mind. You said you almost lost faith in you almost lost faith in humanity based on some things that happened in America. Would you like to?
We just had all kinds of riots. There was great strife in the United States. There was huge separation among a number of different socio-political issues, and so with COVID and it just was really not a good time for people. And so it was kind of a dark view. I mean, it was looking very dystopic. But what I saw in terms of people, it really gave me great hope, and that and that hope and that belief in people and the beauty of humanity still continues to this day. So over so on the 24th and 25th, I'm in contact with M really frequently, and we never actually. This was the interesting thing. We never talked, person to person, like on the phone. It was all done through an end-to-end encrypted service. So it was all done via...
Which language?
English. Yeah, her English was outstanding. Her English was outstanding. Yeah, it would have been an interesting complication if it wasn't good. And so, actually, I worked with a number of families that had... Their English wasn't quite as strong, and there was a lot of reconfirmation and, confirming and clarification before we did anything. But so we were in constant communication, and what I would share with people in the network that I was building, her story. And I was actually getting a number of different seats on planes. So there was planes leaving all the time. The problem was she was about 22 hours away from Kabul. She was working, as I said, in Western Afghanistan. And as you've seen the pictures, and now it's interesting, there's been a huge number of videos that have come out recently just showing the massive sea of humanity around the airport. And so this is a young woman who was very petite, and her being able to navigate that crowd, I mean, thousands deep, I mean, tens of thousands deep. I just saw that as almost an impossibility. And so my situation, while I had plenty of seats on planes, I was given a passcode that if she would flash it at the gate, they would let her through. And so I was getting some really phenomenal intel, some phenomenal support from a number of different people of this network that I had built and that I was helping build into. And so it wasn't me just taking. I was also, as I was getting information or intel from one group, I would ask, can I share this with other people who I trust? And they would say yes. And then I would share it with the other group. So anything that I got, I would share with everybody else. And some of it proved to be quite pivotal with other groups. So it was really the information sharing going back and forth that was so critical to really everybody helping each other and getting people out.
A little bit more specific, yeah. So I'm imagining sitting in this living room, what I'm seeing behind you. How did you communicate with this
Everything
network?
Everything was done on this end-to-end encryption service. Everybody was using it. Actually, I was using WhatsApp first, and then I was learning that people were using a different service, and so I switched over to that service. And
okay, you're very hesitant to name
Signal.
the service.
Yeah,
Why?
we all use Signal because its encryption, in my understanding, is stronger, and so it was considered a safer resource. And so we're all using Signal. You make contacts through Signal. And, the interesting thing is, so in my work for a humanitarian organization, I work on a lot of emergencies as well. Like worked on the Haiti earthquake, the twin disaster in Japan. And what I find during emergencies, everybody is really open to talk to other people. Generally, when people are quite close and there's all kinds of gatekeepers during normal day-to-day operations. But when there's an emergency or a crisis, people are very open to engage, which again, I think is another thing that really speaks to the beauty of the human spirit. And so in this situation, people who would have never talked to me on a normal situation, day-to-day situation, or take my message request or whatever, everybody was taking everybody's. I met some very shady people who, the good thing about people like that is that they self-identify pretty quickly that they're not to be trusted. So there was some people that were war profiteering on situations like this. They were offering, for tremendous sums of money to get people out of the country, but everybody else was looking just to help.
And how do you make the differentiation? I mean, you're on distance. So how do you determine whom you really can trust outside of this defined network that you already have?
It's really through demonstrated behavior. Through discourse analysis that we just talked about, in terms of how people speak. And the good thing or the helpful thing about people who are, in this case, war profiteering, looking to gouge people, take advantage of people's, horrible situation for profits, and pretty significant profits. They self-identify pretty quickly. And so it was pretty easy to suss those people out in short time. And there were some people that just were peddling in rumor. And so, again, those people I was not interested to have part of, because there was with any type of crisis, there's tremendous amounts of rumor. There was rumor about that Signal had been penetrated. There was rumor about that, people are going door to door in this area and that area. And that was what was really helpful about the network that I had built, because I was able to confirm this with some other people, special forces who were actually on the ground, and ask them if they were hearing this, as well as like NSA, transmission and communication, things like that, things that people were able to share. Obviously there was a lot that people were not able to share, but everything that, people were able to share, it was pretty easy to begin to dispel what was rumor and what was fact. So over the 25th and 26th, we started building all these different options, but the question kept on coming up: how are we going to get her to the gate? And that was the problem that needed to be solved, because getting the seats on the plane was not a problem. At least it didn't seem to be a problem. Getting her to and through the gate was the big problem. At a couple of times, I had actually private military groups that were going around the city and picking up people. I had arranged for her to get picked up. And then it was such a kinetic and such a fluid environment that, things were always changing. The map and the game board was always changing. And so while that might have been there, at 11 o'clock at night, by the time I got up at 4 in the morning to start, again, that situation had totally changed.
But this time, let me think. But this time, had the Taliban already taken Kabul on the 24th?
They were in Kabul, and they were actually operating the outer rings, and that was also the concern as well. Is that there were so many? There was ISIS-K checkpoints as well as a number of Taliban checkpoints as well.
In preparation of this conversation with you, I saw I don't know how many videos specifically in this around the last week or so. Yeah. And I think it's worth outlining this picture a little bit more. Yeah. So all the gateways streets to the airport were already under control from the Taliban. Around the airport, there was a military part and there was a civil part. Yeah. There were literally tens of thousands of people flooding even straight on the runway from the civil part. Yeah. The militaries had trouble to keeping the military part separated. Yeah. So it was absolute mayhem. And I saw even, for whatever reasons, the Taliban were shooting all the time. Yeah. I mean, not necessarily on people, but I think they tried to control the crowd a bit. Shooting, crying, panic. It's an absolute nightmare for a single woman in that situation.
Yeah, and they were taking people away. There was, at one time, they were redirecting people trying to leave to a hotel. That was actually... They're saying, to get your final paperwork, go to this hotel. And then when you go to the hotel, they would lock you up. And so they were doing a number of different things. They were, in fact, shooting people who were climbing the fence. The other thing, too, is about the airport. The airport is tiny. Everybody thinks it's like this large, major airport that you would think out of like New York or, out of Germany or, France or England, whatever the case may be. It is a tiny airport. So the amount of people around the airport and all the chaos that was involved within the airport was always a huge issue.
I think it's also maybe worth outlining. So there were a couple of days where actually the flight controllers fled. Right, there were airplanes in the air; they couldn't land because there were no flight controllers. Till the U.S. military took over the flight controls. Yeah, so there were really critical situations of airplanes running out of fuel, airplanes being diverted, not being able to take up, or airplanes on the ground actually having troubles taking off because all the people on the ground.
Yeah, and actually, two planes almost hit each other, and so there was all kind. I mean, it was from every element you can think of, it was complete chaos. I mean, it was just a horrible, horrible situation for everybody. And so we were trying to navigate that situation and to help get this woman out. And then I got a piece of critical information from somebody in my network that because of the complete chaos, they were supposed to leave on the 31st of August. That was the actual official departure timeline, and they moved it up to, as you had mentioned earlier, to the 29th. And obviously, we're 22 hours away, or Emma's 22 hours away, so that changes the entire situation. And now, rather than we were trying to operate a little bit from the luxury of, okay, we'll get everything set up, and then we'll move her. And then the situation, this was really one of the benefits of always having a team, that you're able to bounce things off of people. But it was a tough call to make. I mean, I'll admit, I was not comfortable. I was nervous making this call because it's so much responsibility that you're taking on someone's life. And so I said, I think we need to move her. And then my other two colleagues, they really encouraged, we need to start moving her now. And so we had to put her on a bus, heading for Kabul, without a plan. So we had 22 hours to figure it out because we're sending her into chaos now. And I was going through all these different plans. She's on the bus. We're communicating. And then every plan hit the same problem. How do we get it to the gate? And then one of my colleagues said, I've got this one friend, they're working on a different plan that's, maybe you should talk to him. And so he actually works for a security firm here in the United States, a corporate security firm. And so I reached out to him. The information that I got back wasn't really enlightening, and so I didn't really get it at first, but it started nagging at me a little bit. So I asked for more information, and then his chief of staff stepped in, and she laid out the whole plan. And then the director of operations added 2 details to the plan that was not in the original email. And then soon I'm like, that's it. That's the plan. And this plan, like literally, as I've said before, made no sense at all. It seemed, and for all the reasons it didn't make sense, it actually made sense in kind of the chaotic environment. Because what it was is we were heading towards the Taliban, into really the Taliban stronghold, and it was a small flight going out of there. And so...
you mean from a different airport than Kabul?
It's the one that we call now Erewhon. And so that it was going to nowhere. Yeah, it was going to fly out of nowhere. Out of Afghanistan, in the heart of the Taliban. I mean, that's where. So the Taliban was slowly taking over Kabul. This is where they were all. This was their staging area. So the area that the people that we were trying. The idea was the people that we were trying to get her from. We were driving. The idea was to drive her towards. And, that's the last thing most people would expect. And so that's what made it make sense for me. It was so, what's the word I'm looking, I can't think of the word I'm looking for. It was just so illogical. There was a deep, powerful logic within its illogic. And so I ran it by, I'm not going to make this decision by myself. I ran it by a few people that I really trusted in terms of it was active special forces on the ground. I said, this is our plan. What do you think? He goes, I would jump on that plan. And so I got a few different inputs and everybody was agreed. I talked to Em about it and I said, look, you're going to meet some really scary people at the end of it, but everybody's in on it. Everybody's a part of the plan. And I go, what do you want to do? And she says, I've decided to do this and so I'll do it. And so we had a plan and that became a very exciting moment. Now the idea was to operationalize the plan, in terms of really execute the plan. So what that required her to do is now she arrived 22 hours into Kabul, and then there was a driver meeting her at the bus station that would take her another 8 hours away, up northeast. And so she got to...
The driver was in. The driver was
he was a part of it. Yep, he was a part of the network.
So it's a local driver, right? So just a thought. So first of all, how did you get involved? And second, how did you know that you could trust him?
The party that we were aligned, so now we're linked up to a team that was doing it in evacuation. And so they were exfiltrating a number of people, and we were able to get her on their list. And so they had a team available that was doing it. The people that were helping them on the ground were somewhat questionable people, but that's what made it attractive. Because I figured if anybody can do it, it's these guys. I mean, you want the bad guys working in a bad situation. You kind of want the bad guys working for you, and that's what it was to a certain degree.
Okay, so you jumped a little bit. The backstory, we have a little jump there. So I understood you had your own little team, which is slowly by little expanding, right, through your contacts. And then suddenly you are having access to a team who is already engaged in exfiltrations. How did this contact come to place?
Again, this is the network of trust. Everybody, so I don't have a plane. I don't have means to get out of the country. What I was building is relationship and partnership with a variety of different partners. A variety of different players and organizations that were getting people on planes in Kabul and getting people out. So that's how I was able to get her seats on planes and getting her names on lists, is through contacts that would then just ultimately the person responsible for putting her name on a manifest would put her name on a manifest. And so this was probably one of the biggest partnerships I've built and one of the most complicated ones. I was building partnerships with all these different individuals, as well as, and they were connected to larger parties. As I said a moment ago, this one of my members of my team, our 3-person team, she had a friend who was working on something as well. He worked for a U.S. security firm, and they were running this partnership out, they were running this exfiltration out of what we call Erewhon. And so I reached out to them. I reached out to the chief of staff there, who I'll call L. And I said, look, this is our person. This is our situation. Can we get on your flight? And she said, yes. She said, the one thing we can do is we can help you get a driver to the north. You're responsible for everything else. Then you got to get her to a checkpoint. And that's when they'll put her on they'll pick her up and put her on the plane. And so they helped arrange the driver. Everything was paid for. So these people were making money. The people on the ground, but they're also putting themselves in serious danger as well. So drivers and such were getting well paid for this work. And so in a situation like that, you want people to be well paid. And so I was encouraged by the fact that everybody was getting paid up the line to get her on that plane.
Where did the funds come from?
Private parties from the U.S. They never asked us for $1, and so they were. Okay. This was private funded exfiltration that was being implemented by this security firm.
Okay.
So we got on the airport. The driver was meeting right there. Picked her up, put her in the car. We were able to track her with satellites as the car was moving as well. And so everything was going good. And the interesting thing about this, what made this plan so beautiful, is there was all kinds. So as we mentioned, there was all these Taliban checkpoints around the airport. There's all these Taliban checkpoints on the way to Kabul too. But there was no Taliban checkpoints on the other side of the road coming out of Kabul. And so the whole world was looking at Kabul. And the fact that this was happening in the city that I think the least likely city for this to happen that's what made so much sense for me. It was just so unlikely, and that everybody was focused in another. It was the classic misdirection. Everybody was focused in another area. That it enabled her to move quite freely and quite smoothly. So we were able to, we were in constant conversation the whole way. Now I had 8 hours to find a safe house in this area. Again, this is a really heavily populated Taliban stronghold, and we had to find a safe house for her now. And so through a variety of contacts and some people that had worked there previously, and that knew people that had a business that had to evacuate with the impending fall of Afghanistan, that they had left some apartments open. And so, everything, it was just amazing how everything just lined up so beautifully. And so we now had a nice apartment for her to stay in that was in a reasonably secure area of Erewhon, whereby she could be in kind of a hide spot or a safe house. And then on the floor below her was the man who worked for the man who gave us the apartment, and he was going to drive her to the rally point. And so she got up to Erewhon safely. We had a couple missed attempts to get her on the plane. The plane had to be canceled twice. The flight was canceled twice, so obviously that was very nerve-wracking. Things in Kabul were getting substantially more tense, obviously, with the bombing. And, the U.S. had then left now. The last flight went out on the 29th. And then the flight that we were able to finally get her on was early the morning of the 30th. It did not go super smooth at the airport. She got lost twice. But ultimately it worked out phenomenally, and we were able to get her on the plane. She linked up with the group well. We were able to get her on the plane, and I got a text message with her with a photo of her seat looking outward on the plane. And then the next photo I got from her was from a neighboring country. that was going to be kind of the lily pad to her final destination, which was in North America.
What was for you her final moment of freedom, when she was on the plane or when she landed somewhere else?
Yeah.
Okay, so that moment that you realized she's out, she's safe, she's somewhere else, how did you feel?
I gotta be honest, it took a couple days for it to sink in. I had gone 4 days with 4 hours sleep. And so I was absolutely wiped out. And I was really emotionally spent as well. The airport was incredibly stressful. When she's in an airport as a single woman, full of Taliban fighters, again, it was a heavily populated area of the Taliban, and for her to be a single woman, which is a very serious problem, and to be lost in the airport, she got separated from the group, was obviously a high stress moment. So we were so close, but it almost failed at the very last line.
How did she come through security at the airport?
That was part of the plan as well, and so that was all covered. These were these were serious professionals. No, this wasn't me. These were serious professionals. They had everything worked out.
So what I'm sensing here, and this is probably not a topic for today. What I'm sensing here, there is a massively interesting backstory which we're only scratching.
And I'm not privy to a lot of it myself. This group is, this is what they do. They're a global security firm that helps all types of organizations and corporations deal with security problems. Everything from hostage negotiation to rescues to, fortified protection of areas as well. And so they had a lot of contacts. And there was a lot of people looking to make money. It was difficult to, I didn't get fully involved. Obviously they would only share so much with me as well. But they had the beauty was that they had, once you got to the rally point, everything was worked out. They had a few hiccups. That's why we had 2 canceled flights. But after that, everything worked out as planned.
Okay. Then I'm guessing you took a couple of days off or not, I don't know. And then you said to yourself, okay, that wasn't excitement enough. I do another 40. It was very rewarding. And so when she was finally at her final destination, North America, I talked to her. I said, kind of who else needs help? And she gave me a list of 17 I want to say it was 13 families, plus her parents, plus the gentleman who drove her to the rally point. Because I was in constant contact with him as well. His English was really good as well. And so, I was not going to trust him just because someone was kind enough to give us an apartment, but I wasn't going to trust his driver necessarily. So I was constantly vetting him and talking to him and engaging with him. But also I wanted to make sure that he was a safe person for her to get into a car with to drive to the rally point. So we helped get him and his family out as well. As I said, her parents, about 13 other families associated with the same organization. And then this network of trust continued to grow. And then I helped get a green card family out as well. A U.S. green card family that wasn't in any way associated with. It was a congressman who needed some help, and someone gave him his staff or his chief of staff my name, and I helped get this one family out. The family of a U.S. congressman?
No, it was they were U.S. green card holders from the U.S., and they were part of his constituents, and so he was trying to help them, and someone gave him his chief of staff my name, and so I helped him get them out.
And the consequent exfiltrations, they followed the blueprint from the first one?
No, everyone was different. Every single one was different. The rest of the people moved out in large groups, and it was through a variety of organizations. And then it was trying to get people on different manifests coming out of the same city in different cities. There was more than one Erewhon. Getting them on manifest, because you had all these phenomenal groups like Task Force Argo, Save Our Allies, the Nazarene Fund, all these amazing organizations, evacuating people out of cities. So it was really getting them on those lists, getting them vetted and on those lists to get out of the country. The amazing thing was that everybody I was working with had a visa. So a third party country actually had issued all these family visas. And so they had plans outside of the United States, or excuse me, outside of Afghanistan, to legally enter that country. So they had a full plan out of Afghanistan into residency of another country as a permanent resident. So they wouldn't get stuck in a lily pad country, in an intermediary country. The hard part is that they could only exercise the visa once they left the country. And so it was getting them out of the country. That was the challenge, evacuating them out of the country. That was the challenge. And so many of these groups, again, we're doing all things pro bono. No one ever asked us for money. And they were, that's what I'm saying. There was mine was just a very small, thread in this amazing tapestry where these groups like Nazarene Funds, I think they ran like 23 flights. I don't know if that's the accurate number, but they helped rescue thousands and thousands of people.
Amazing. I just heard in an interview, I think President Biden said 127,000 people were evacuated in 18 days. But I do believe in this number, the target group that you were referring to are not
this
included.
Was all done privately. Yeah, so I'd say that number was substantially higher.
Yeah. What was Robin's kind of input here? Because I saw a little bit an indication that he might have been involved.
So he was involved, really I have read a number of his books. I was really engaged by his book, It's Not About You. And so I was actually asking him to see kind of what his speaker fees are, if he'd be interested in doing a presentation for the organization that I worked for, because I thought it was such a beautiful way to build partnership, is through his kind of 10 techniques of building rapport. And we were talking back and forth about it, and then I kind of dropped off and for a couple months, and then I re-engaged him. I said, I want to thank you so much, because your book about building rapport, all of his techniques about speaking in terms, seeking the thoughts and opinions of others, speaking in terms of their priorities, validating them, giving them options. Yeah. That was the framework I used the entire time for helping people in Afghanistan and building that network of trust. And so I was really in deep gratitude to Robin, for really him sharing his information that enabled me to then go and help out a number of people.
Okay, so for the viewers' benefit, Robin Drake is a former FBI counterterrorism. He was the head of the FBI's counterterrorism behavior analysis program. And coincidentally, I had interviewed him, and I think 10 days ago, I interviewed his former boss, Jack Schaefer. Yeah, who, by the way, is also a linguist. Yeah, he wrote his PhD on text bridges. Yeah, and he was in Holland last week, where I'm located in the Netherlands, here in Amsterdam. He was here.
He is an amazing individual. I love his books. Jack Schaefer, his books are incredible.
And he, as a person, I have not had time yet to edit the interview, right? But it was absolutely on the same line as Robin. Very outgoing, very accommodating, very open to share, what they have, not protective, and a lifetime of experience. What can trump that?
Absolutely. Right? I would say, Robin Drake, Jack Schaefer, Chris Voss, also from the FBI counterterrorism, and then Joe Navarro. They've played a huge role in so much of my personal and professional development. And it was actually Joe Navarro's kind of worldview of that if you have any information that can help just one person, that it's incumbent upon you to share it, was the reason why I did not want to do an interview. But the fact that I heard Joe Navarro said that, I thought, if in any way these interviews can help someone else, then it's really my responsibility to actually do them. And so it was Joe's comment that really pushed me to agree with Robin to do these interviews.
I think Joe Navarro and his circle have influenced many other people, right? Not only with the books, but also with the personality, with the information they're sharing. Which brings me to a question that I have already on my mind quite a while ago. Seeing that experience, this overall experience, and I'm pulling this now out and putting it into the corporate world, and you have a background in the corporate world, right? What would be the the quintessential lessons from your experience that could be of value in corporate life, corporate management, corporate negotiations, etc.?
That's a big question. I think there's a number of things. You operate, so in terms of how I do negotiations and definitely how I try to engage and build rapport with people as well, especially as I did with M, I try to operate out of their framework, out of their mindset, and kind of, the environment within their own head. People make decisions for their reasons, not your reasons. And so I try to really play on their game board, and not what I want, but really in terms of how they are seeing things. And that's the one thing that I really appreciate about Robin's book, is that it's all about the other person. And I really try to focus on, that's my starting place. I want to help people, and I want to engage with people, and I want to make, if any partnership or any negotiation that I do, I want it to be, ideally, it doesn't have to be necessarily a successful negotiation, although that's my intention. I want it to be a good negotiation. And so I really try to operate from their framework, and if it works, great. If it doesn't work out, then it didn't work out for the right reasons. So I try to, really operate through their mind and through their context. Because I find when we operate from our own, that's when separation really begins to take place, and that's where things get hostile and difficult. And it doesn't. I think we need more empathy in life and more engagement in life, and I think that those are the things that really connect with people, and that's, I think, what has contributed so much to my success. Because I've had quite a bit of success in building partnerships. So I had one really interesting, actually two back-to-back interesting engagements with two vice presidents of different pharmaceutical companies. We were engaging them in some. Wasn't necessarily a partnership opportunity. It was more of a collaboration opportunity. This is probably about 8 to 10 years ago. And in the meeting, I ended the meeting. I said, how can I help you? And I remember the first vice president. He's like, excuse me. I said, yeah. I go, how can I help you? And he sat back in his chair. He says, I've been doing this job for 17 years. He said, no one has ever asked me that question before. And I was sincere in terms of I wanted to figure out what his needs were and what his priorities were, and to see if we could be a help to him. And a few months later, I was in another vice president's office of another pharmaceutical company, and I asked the exact same question. And it was kind of eerie how similar his response was. But he sat back and he shook his head and kind of laughed. He says, in 14 years of doing this job as vice president, he goes, no one has ever asked me that. And, I still have good relationships with both of them as a result of that. I mean, we've both changed careers and, moved on. But when I cross their paths every once in a while, I mean, it's like we saw each other yesterday. We have very good relationships. So I think if you, really operate with that spirit of how can I help you, really looking to help other people, I think it has really, not that I'm doing it for any type of return or reciprocity, but I just think it gets things on the right place in terms of you give first. It shows you being a trustworthy person, and then people want to help you in return. I think the other area is really, I really like stoicism, kind of the stoic mindset. I focus on what I can control and what I can't control. And so in the case of M and other things, I focused on what I could do, and I didn't worry about the things that I couldn't do. And so it's, I think Robin calls them your means goals. I knew what we wanted to do, but my sole focus was all my disciplines and getting this to be successful at every single stage and staying really present into what the next thing I needed to do was. And that's the same thing in terms of negotiation. I don't worry. I don't start with the outcome. I don't say, okay, I want this to happen. I focus primarily on all the right moves and all the right things that I need to be doing during the negotiation, engaging with the other party, finding out information, asking them questions, and the outcomes usually take care of themselves. I've never had to close anybody. I should say, this is the account that I always talk about. I've tried to close people twice in my professional career, and both were absolute disasters. And I've never closed and tried to close anybody. But if you do all the disciplines right, that's the natural consequence of all those disciplines, is a really positive conclusion. So as a real result, I mean, I've worked with deals probably hundreds of millions of dollars total.
How long did this experience last, from let's say M till the last? I don't know if you're still engaged. How long?
I would say it was 5 days. Then it probably went on for another, let's see, about 6 months. I think the last time we got out right after the new year. And then interestingly, I just got a message on Signal yesterday about someone who needs help getting a family member out. They have all the visas lined up. They just need help getting them out. And so I don't know if I can do anything. I've not been doing anything in that area for quite a long time. I still have a couple contacts, and so I'm going to see, what I can do.
Yeah. So in this situation, of course, the contacts dissipate, right? They're not stationary.
Yeah. I mean, other people go on. Yeah, because this is all volunteers, and so they've all gone on to other things. I mean, it's in the environment on the ground has changed substantially. There's not all those exfil and evacuation operations, have gone on to other things.
After such a, if you can call it, peak experience, what's next for you?
Just kind of day to day. I mean, I'm trying to be a good father, a good husband, a good employee. And I'm kind of excited with again, this was an adventure that I never expected. We'll see how this, figures into something else in the future. I think, kind of all experiences, and all opportunities, play a different role at some opportunity in the future. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. If nothing else, hopefully the information that I'm sharing and the approach that we took and that whole experience will have some positive effect for somebody else. So maybe there is nothing else after this. It's just a nice life. But hopefully maybe this information in some way will have benefited somebody else.
Yeah. Last question. Are you still in contact with M? Do you know what happened to her after she came out?
Oh, yeah. People, I think it's one of the interesting things about people too. They're pretty resilient. Most of the families moved on pretty quickly with their life after that, in their new host country. I've not heard much from many of them. Every once in a while, someone will reach out. Her and I have had a little bit of contact now and then. Actually, interestingly, I hear from her brother, who was also able to escape. He did it all by himself, to his credit. He was hard to help. He had a very difficult situation. He did it almost all by himself. I was able to give him some information and some support, but it had come at quite a bit of a later time, whereby I didn't have as many assets, and my network was a lot smaller at that point. But every once in a while, he'll send out a message, and he's very grateful and he's very kind. And I'm more proud of these families in terms of what they had to endure. I cannot even begin to imagine what they were going through in terms of the uncertain future that so many of these families had. And so, I think I played a small part. They carried the heavy weight. They carried the lion's share, but it was them, their families' lives that were on the line, and they were putting their trust into not only me but other parties to help get them out. And so I can't imagine the stress level that they were under. So I'm amazed and just humbled by them, and just how proud I am of them, of how they responded to the whole situation. And I really pray that if I'm ever in a situation even close to that I can hold up as strong as they did.
Absolutely. Maybe one last thing. Coming back to linguistics, because discourse analysis, and you mentioned it, yeah. You executed discourse analysis to verify if you can trust the person or not. Would you care to comment a little bit exactly what you verify and how? I would be very interested.
I think one of the most important areas for me about showing someone's predictability in terms of if they're a valuable resource or if they're trustworthy is congruence. And so I read this article a number of years ago. Actually, so I taught at a graduate school, a business school, for a number of years. And I read this article by this couple named Harmon and Harmon. It was called The 7 C's of Clear Communication. And it was different. I've read a number of I tried to find it, but couldn't find it. I've read a number of those articles since then. And theirs was always different, and because it had congruence in it. I think congruence, if you have a congruent message that spans over the course of time, you are a trustworthy person, because it's hard to maintain congruence with false information or insincere information or lies. It's really hard to be congruent when you're lying or when you're not fully invested into something. So when people are congruent, that's when they're really rock solid and able to be trusted.
Sound concluding words, Keith. I'm very grateful that you spent your time outlining your absolutely fantastic, I don't think that's the right word. It's an amazing experience, not only for you, but for all the people involved. And I'm including the people on the ground who actually make this all happen. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to imagine. It must be a surreal experience for both sides. Yeah. For the evacuees, but also for the people helping them, being in this kind of, I don't know, surreal world where all the normal rules, laws, psychological models are not working. Yeah, I think it's a life-changing experience for anyone going through, and I'm sure it had a lasting influence and impact on your life, the point of view in regards to life, equally. Yeah. So again, really appreciate your time. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you. I wish you all the best for your future, whatever your future might bring. You mentioned before the call you're moving. You're moving in a different country or just to a different place?
Across the country. Not a different country. Cross country.
Okay. Keith, many thanks. Warm greetings from Amsterdam. Who knows? Maybe our paths cross again in the future somewhere.
I hope so.
Okay.
I would really love that. No, it's been an honor and a pleasure. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And I'm just honored that you'd be interested even talking to me. So thank you so much, Thomas. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All the best. Thank you for watching. As you have seen, one man can make a difference even in the most adverse circumstances. But it takes a certain skill set. Acquiring this skill set takes time and dedication, which only few will commit to. If you came this far, you're one of the few. Congratulations, you're ahead of the pack. And lastly, consider liking and subscribing if you appreciate the content. It costs you nothing and helps this channel.